If you have any doubt, this document is proof that there is a global initiative with its nexus in the U.S., focused in the United Nations, to remove all firearms from civilians under the guise of military weapons. And we'll talk a bit about what this really means. This was circulated in 2000 through the UN by U.S. authors as a, quote, comment paper. Most of the content of this is the basis for all of the legal energy focused on removing Second Amendment rights in this country. Now, the basis of this paper is to minimize the ability for weapons that focus on civil war issues in other countries. But the language is the language of the anti-gun movement in this country and around the world. While the title said remove military weapons from civilian hands, the language in the body talks about military style weapons. In framing the problem, the author talks about military style automatic weapons. By the way, read that as semi-automatic, because that's also the class of firearm they're talking about, that are more terrible or as terrible as landmines. Wow. The authors go on to say, quote, "These weapons are made for war," close quote. Well, here's a blinding flash of the obvious. All long guns, from the ubiquitous musket to today's semi-automatic rifles, bolt-action rifles, were originally made for war. All of them, without exception. The fact that some are used for sport and some are used for hunting is irrelevant. Firearm is intended for war and or defense of the person who is holding it. It's as simple as that. They say that these weapons, quote, have been designed to be used by trained military personnel. However, their use has spread far beyond the intended clientele, which means soldiers. Therefore, civilians should never have access to these military-style weapons. In today's world, and especially in the United States of America, these military-style rifles are nothing more than the modern musket. Under the guise of protecting humanitarian rights, the goal is to remove military-style weapons from the hands of civilians, which they consider to be the most deadly threat to people in the world. In areas like Africa, Latin America, South Asia, Central Asia, Europe and the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, they frame the use of these weapons as prolonging conflicts and propagating the interests of organized and opportunistic criminals. Then they focus on us, West. Read that as North America. Read that as the United States of America. Western Europe or Oceania. Widespread availability lands them onto the streets of cities to serve the purposes of organized crime and the drug barons. Really. And here's the kicker, right? In some cases, they have found their way into the hands of unstable individuals with tragic consequences. Come on. Come on. They've played a central role in destabilizing civil law and order where its grip is often tenuous. That is a straight shot across the bow of the United States of America's Second Amendment protections, meaning there are some ways of protecting yourself that you should not have access to. And these evil-looking style guns are part of the problem. So it's no longer about the action of the gun, in this case automatic versus semi-automatic, which really doesn't matter, but in the case of legislation it does. But the person should not have the ability to pull the trigger, whatever, regardless of the rifle, regardless of the handgun, and have one round every time you pull the trigger, whether it's pulling the trigger fast or pulling the trigger slow. That's the sole difference. But according to these authors, it doesn't make a difference. They're bad because they're long guns. The authors refer to the availability of these type of weapons in the hands of civilians in the United States, read that as law-abiding citizens. Such weapons distort society. And this is where danger lies, everyone. They make it harder for the state to regain the legitimate monopoly of force. They enhance the capabilities of criminals, thus compromising the effectiveness of police forces, and encourages law-abiding citizens to arm themselves for protection. In other words, law-abiding citizens should not arm themselves for protection. They lower the threshold for violence, and they are very easy for children to obtain and use. Now we're talking about AR class, a.k.a. class, FAL class rifles. I don't know of any child who has had access to that. Now keep in mind, in the United States of America, while we do, as citizens, give our government, our governments, whether it's local, state, or federal, the authority to have a monopoly on the use of force to enforce the law. The law. And these are laws that have sustained constitutional review. So they are acceptable laws. Otherwise, they are unconstitutional laws, and barring the ability to fix that through additional legislation, it leads its way to civil war. Now, it's been a long time since that's happened in this country. But there are some things that should not be touched. Those are the Bill of Rights, the first 10, which cannot be changed or repealed at all, and the other amendments of the Constitution as well. But this paper goes at the heart of the ability in our Constitution for individuals to protect themselves. And oh, by the way, since 2008, the Supreme Court has said it is settled law. The Second Amendment guarantees the individual, that's you and me, the right to have a firearms for protection. It is not a collective right. It is an individual right. Further, and again, this is a straight shot at this unique country and our unique Second Amendment. Not only do these weapons find their way into conflict zones and into the hands of civilian combatants, they also turn up in weak or failed states, in states with permissive legislation where they can be legally held. That's our country. That's the United States of America. That is us today. We have a right to have those weapons. The primary goal for us is self-defense. Either self-defense individually and as collective individuals collectively. These guys don't want weapons in the hands of any civilian at all, anywhere. All right. Now let's talk about their solutions. All right. Hold on to your seat. Remember, this is a discussion paper written by American authors for the United Nations. Number one, ban sales to non-state actors, meaning if you're an individual, you can't have it. You can't have it. You can't have it. You can't buy it. You can't have it. You can't possess it. That's the first solution, or part of the solution. Anything that a state doesn't need, in other words, it's surplus now, it should be destroyed. And anything that needs to be as spares or as surplus should be tightly managed. Now, an important thing about this getting rid of all the weapons in the hands of civilians and giving them to the state presupposes that the state is capable of protecting civilians in the first place. Now, keep in mind that when seconds count, the state or police are minutes away. A third area is called brokering. Primarily what that means is that unless you are a registered, licensed broker, and that means you can only sell to nation states or to states, you can't any longer handle transactions of firearms, so all the FFLs are out of business unless they decide to become registered arms brokers. Good luck. Now, one of the biggest quote solutions that this paper talks about is one that's really dangerous. It's right up there with a couple of other ones, and that is ammunition control, specifically focused on 5.56 and 7.62 ammunition. Now, if you remember earlier this year, there was a big hoopla over getting rid of green tip 5.56 ammo. That was just the tip of the iceberg. The real goal is to control that ammunition and keep it away from civilians at all costs. You do that, and basically you render, whether the firearms are turned in or not, you render them useless. Now, for you history buffs, please keep in mind that the American Revolution was started because the British government tried to take the powder that was used with the muskets of the American colonists, because everybody had a long gun, just like today. The AR platform and the AK is the modern musket. It's the modern musket. It is the tool used as a long gun for civilians, for citizens. So any effort to take away the ammunition, whether directly or make it so expensive so you can't buy it, I think would create major social issues. The last plank in their solution platform is to create a civil society campaign. Read that as a strong, outspoken, anti-gun movement. And you see that happening in this country. A strong anti-gun movement. While the people who wrote this and their audiences around the world are continually frustrated by the degree of acceptance and desire to have and use our Second Amendment that we have in this country. Outside of our borders, including our neighbors to the north in Canada and elsewhere, they don't get it. They don't get it. I feel sorry for them. They don't get it. But the fact is, we have that amendment, the first 10 Bill of Rights, that guarantee us that right and has been upheld by the Supreme Court. So, we're going to keep our guns. We're not going to be subjected to a UN-based effort to remove all firearms, rifles or handguns, semi-automatic or not, from this culture. And those that are uncomfortable who live here need to reconsider whether they want to continue living here or just be silent. Law-abiding armed citizens are not a danger to the general public. Now, thanks for watching.